We're talking about St. Louis's rich architectural history and historic preservation with one of the city's most visible and active young leaders. Architectural historian Michael Allen joins us next on City Corner. I'm Sarah Thompson and welcome to City Corner. I'm really excited today to talk to architectural historian Michael Allen. He's known in St. Louis, all over in St. Louis, for not only his bow ties, but his knowledge and his input on St. Louis's rich history in architecture. So thank you for joining us today. So you wear many hats. A lot of people know you. You're a public historian, architectural historian, and you are also the director of the Preservation Research Office. Before we get into our kind of topics that we're going to cover today, tell me a little bit about the Preservation Research Office and what exactly it does.
Good question. Well, Preservation Research Office is sort of was my answer to how do you best save buildings. So I spent 4 or 5 years doing advocacy work before that, and then I realized, you know, in St. Louis, there's really a need for sort of high quality, I wouldn't say low cost, but it's, you know, low overhead, very flexible technical services. People have a lot of questions, and you know, saving buildings involves using government regulations, government tax credit programs, sometimes technical skills involving the physical fabric of buildings. All these things are at people's fingertips, but sometimes they don't realize that. So Preservation Research Office, we try to connect people to these resources, make the processes simple. I've been doing it for 4 years. Like I said, very low overhead. We're very flexible, low cost. We respond to the needs of the project.
Right. So, I mean, just to put this in context too for people at home who are listening to this, because St. Louis has so many historic structures and there's so much renovation, sometimes people want to knock it down. You come in and sort of, you're hired to sort of give the history of this or look into it for its basically its history. It's kind of how it's labeled and what, is that correct? And how it would pertain to people getting historic tax credits.
Right. I mean, sometimes people come to us because they want to use tax credits or they want to get a neighborhood designated as a historic district. Involves lots of research and expertise to put together those documents. Sometimes it's a more casual question. Sometimes it's a building owner who doesn't know if they want to save their building or not. They want to see if it's eligible, but they also want to see if it's financially feasible to save the building. And so they're asking questions about, you know, the structural condition and integrity, and we take care of some of that or outsource it to other people who have the expertise.
Well, speaking of saving,
hopefully we convert some people.
Yeah. Well, no, you do a lot of interesting things. So speaking of saving buildings, the big thing in the news right now is the Couples Complex downtown, Couples 7. Tell me your sort of insight. We're looking at an image of it right now. Tell me your kind of insight on this. What do you think about the demolition of this?
Well, I think the loss of Couple 7 is a tragedy. It's sort of a failure to imagine different ways of funding things. I think it's really sad in this day and age that we're still tearing big buildings downtown down. Like that, a demolition would even be possible 2 blocks from Busch Stadium. But you know, admittedly, it's a building that 3 years ago, 4 years ago, you could have put a roof on it for $100,000 to keep it standing for another 20 years, and that didn't happen, and now it's an $8 million question. So I wouldn't say this was an easy question for the city to solve. I'm a little disappointed that there was a rush to sort of tear it down so quickly, and that the end result's going to be a vacant lot. If you are classified as a historic preservationist, what do you think is at the core of people who professionally do what you do, but also those who are just passionate about saving St. Louis's architecture? What's at the core of it for you? Is it so people have some sort of image or something physical that represents history, or is it a principle that's behind it? Yeah, I think there are 2 principles, maybe, among many others, but 2 major principles. I mean, one is, I think people deserve to live in beautiful environments. City residents deserve a beautiful city, and these buildings are, historic buildings offer a richness that we will never see again. They define place. Far from their aesthetic, historical, stylistic attributes, just, you know, the quality of the materials themselves creates this rich backdrop. And the more we lose, the less of it we have. And more often than not in St. Louis, the choice is not between an old building and a new building. It's between a building at all and a vacant lot. Vacant lots do not create a beautiful world for us. The second principle is really economic. These buildings are already built. Somebody already took care of the construction costs. The pre-development is already done. It's much more affordable to do business in an existing building than a new one with its high construction overhead. So if we really want St. Louis to be a magnet for small businesses and startups, we need a big supply of commercial space in existing buildings, places like Cherokee Street and Washington Avenue 10 years ago. Same goes for housing.
Sure. No, that's and that's important. It's important because I think sometimes people always want to question, what's the motivation besides the aesthetic sort of principle of it. And I think that you've brought some good points. Let's talk about some of the projects that you've done, because you've done so many projects in St. Louis. It wasn't possible to bring them all up, but we do have some photos of one that I thought was really interesting was City Hospital and the power plant. Right. And so we're going to start looking at some images of that. Tell me what you did with this project.
This was a fun project. We didn't have to help save it or figure that out. We were called in by the developers and architects of the climbing gym inside of the old power plant, which dates to 1937. Our work was to develop a history of the building, not for any kind of regulatory function, but to celebrate its history and use that in programming. And that ended up leading to an article series on the National Trust's website on not just the history of this power plant, but on the incredible story of its adaptive reuse. I mean, it is the only climbing gym inside of a power plant in North America. Yeah. This is a tough type of building to adapt. You have this huge spatial volume, this irregular space. If you want to get historic tax credits to rehab it, you have to keep those attributes. You got to keep it open. Well, what do you do with it? Expensive to heat, lots of empty overhead space.
And there's an image of it, the climbing gym. Yeah.
Totally outside of the box. And that's what happened here. So we basically did sort of public history work to enhance those qualities of the building and make the users more aware of what that place is and what it's been to the city.
That's interesting. And then with the Palladium, tell me about with the Palladium.
Well, Palladium is an interesting project because it's sort of, I think it's a project in search of a client. Some would say, it's a save the building, hug the building sort of approach, but I see it as more sort of economic. We are creating sort of a culture of interest in this building, built in 1913 as a roller rink on the edge of Grand Center. It's right by Powell Hall. Became a famous jazz dance ballroom. Went through many names, Palladium, Club Plantation, and others. So it's an important part of St. Louis's cultural history. But how do you connect people to it? So we did an event a couple weeks ago where we had jazz dancers, musicians, Pokey Lafarge showed up.
Oh, really?
Miss Jubilee played. Just to sort of get some current cultural associations with that building, because people are really intrigued by the past, but what really gets people motivated to act is some sort of personal link, some pleasant memory from their own lives associated with that place. So that's what we're doing with the Palladium.
Right, and why it's important and relevant.
It has to be important to people now. Just being important to people back in the day doesn't help us figure out what to do with it.
So when I was looking at one of your projects, pulled up an image of this gas station, of a service station, I guess it is, Thurman Station, and I thought that was interesting. Tell me about
things important now.
So tell me about Thurman Station. What's interesting about this?
The city's littered with hundreds of abandoned gas stations, but this is a really pretty, streamlined, modern building, clad in metal paneling, built in 1940. It's just a standard oil station from a prototype plan in the Shaw neighborhood. Here, though, the owner found out the hard way, this building was not considered historic and not eligible for tax credits because the neighborhood's historic period ended before 1940. It was not actually considered contributing to the Shaw district. So they came to us at the last minute trying to get tax credits, saying, oh my gosh, we need to get this building listed. And so we prepared a National Register of Historic Places nomination for this building so they could get redevelopment incentives. It's going to be a catering business. They're going to open up all those windows, clean out the garage bays. It's going to be a very, very pretty building when it's done.
Well, Elia and Oleo, in
Oleo's a good precedent, like that. And so we're seeing another difficult building type, right? We've got tanks buried in the ground. We've got contaminants sometimes in these buildings. But some of these buildings architecturally are very whimsical, very cool
Right.
little spaces. And for small businesses, the perfect square footage. So it's fun to be involved in this one.
You do tours throughout St. Louis. You do tours of all of downtown. You do tours in North City. And then you also do these kind of musical, well, I should say tours of Midtown, looking at clubs and looking at districts. We have some images of Castle Ballroom, and that's part of one of the tours that you do.
Right.
Tell me about a bit more about your tours that you do all over the city.
Yeah, well, these musical tours are fun because they came into being 2 years ago for this annual event called Nevermore Jazz Ball. So again, I like to bring history to where people are. So Nevermore is an annual gathering of jazz dancers that happens right here in St. Louis every fall. About 200, 300 people show up. And so Kevin Belford, a music historian, brought the musical history. I brought the architectural history. So we've done sort of 2 different variants on Midtown. Castle Ballroom is a good destination. Also is a good preservation story because it needs a savior. So trying to include buildings that have been saved, things that are missing, things that are lost, give people stuff to think about, but end on something where there's maybe an action step. So that's been a fun one to do. But tours all over, ranging from Soulard to Old North to the Pruitt-Igoe site to downtown. Bus tours I've done. One day, I think for WashU, I did a bus tour where we went all the way from Washington University through the Central West End, North City, South City, and we ended the day, believe it or not, in Sauget, Illinois, looking at petrochemical factories. So sort of this big overview of everything that you could possibly find in St. Louis, although it was all linked to the theme of public health, so manufacturing.
What I find so interesting about you is you're relatively young, and I say that as a compliment, yet you know so much about St. Louis history. Tell me, how did you even come to this point to be such a, the insight and the knowledge that you have as an architectural historian?
Well, really a lot of it has come through practice more than anything, and passion. The City Hospital Power Plant was a fun project also because that was started my gateway into caring the City Hospital building, seeing it abandoned back in the day when it was this sort of terrifying ruin, but with so much architectural beauty shining through it. That sort of contradiction, I think, really sparked something in my brain that's still flowing, this sort of interest in the life cycles of these buildings, not just these buildings as objects, but as living things that we have to care about. And so that led to study. But actually, in college, I studied literature and history, and I thought I'd be a professor of cultural studies or English. I thought this would just be kind of a set of sideline passion, but after college, I ended up starting in a professional job at Landmarks Association of St. Louis, and really haven't looked back since.
Looked back since, and now everyone knows you as you are the sort of designated architectural historian in St. Louis. We have so much more to talk about. We're going to talk about Pruitt-Igoe. We're going to talk about brick theft in St. Louis, and one of Michael's passion, which is mid-century architecture here in St. Louis. So please stay with us on City Corner.
When some people struggle with their mortgage payments, they become frozen, petrified. Not knowing what to do, they do nothing. But the people who take action are far more likely to get the most positive outcome. Making home affordable is a free government program. Call now to talk one-on-one with a housing expert about the options that are right for you. Real help, real answers, right now.
Wow, these are really good.
You act surprised. Practice makes perfect.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you. Body language can tell you all sorts of things. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911 and get them to a hospital immediately. Learn the body language and spot a stroke fast.
Nice. No. Oops. Yeah, sure. Let's go.
Moms everywhere are finding ways to keep kids active and healthy.
Works every time.
Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov.
I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome back to City Corner. Today I'm talking to architectural historian Michael Allen, who is just a fascinating person here in St. Louis, who knows pretty much everything about every building, every lot, every acre in St. Louis. We were talking in the first half just about some of the projects that you've worked on at Preservation Research Office. I want to talk about Pruitt-Igoe because there was a documentary that was made, and this kind of comes up when people talk about sort of bad decision making, I think, in terms of urban planning. What started off as a good idea and a bad idea. I want to first have us watch the trailer to the documentary, and then when we come out of that, I want you to talk about a project that you started in connection to Pruitt-Igoe. So let's take a look at that.
These developments are run by the St. Louis Housing Authority. This is a far cry from the crowded, collapsing tenements that many of these people have known. Here in bright new buildings with spacious grounds, they can live.
It was a very beautiful place, like a big hotel resort, I'd say.
It was like an oasis in the desert. All this newness. I never thought I would live in that kind of a surrounding.
What happened? Well, one day we woke up and it was all gone.
We pulled up with the moving van. I knew at that point that it was hell on earth.
Pruitt-Igoe looks like a battleground. Vandalism and neglect have left fear among the remaining occupants.
In the middle 50s, St. Louis thought it had solved its low-cost housing needs, but instead a monster was created.
The experiment had gone terribly awry. It was just uncontrollable.
Pruitt-Igoe is such a symbol that we tend to forget that it is no different than the city that surrounded it. What happened to St. Louis was tragic, but that's simply not how we've told the story.
Pruitt-Igoe was always fighting against this terrible riptide of destruction in the midst of an economy that was dying.
The strong, tightly knit communities and families in which I grew up had begun to shatter, and it wasn't there. And it was one of the most tragic things I've seen.
It seemed to me that we were being penalized for being poor. That caused so much anger.
Persons that don't have a decent place to stay are willing to take these kinds of chances. Where we live, we're taking chances.
This is it. This is out of control, and we are no longer going to put up with it. We're not going to tolerate this anymore.
I'm saying, as tenants, we've got to draw a line and say no more. No more.
You know, Pruitt-Igoe, you know, it strikes an emotional chord with a lot of people. I mean, what's your take on it? And you can sort of bring in the project that you started on it. But what's your thoughts on how that started and what it ended up to be?
Well, I mean, I think it's a story of a scale out, out of size with its city, out of size with the changes. So the failure of planners to be able to predict big changes. Pruitt-Igoe could have been a success if St. Louis's population had grown and not declined. So I think the bottom line of that story is that it really shows how architecture is a byproduct of social change. It's not the leader. You can't use bricks and mortar to change the world. The world changes bricks and mortar. And so I got involved in a project recently called Pruitt-Igoe Now, which was an ideas competition for the site where Pruitt-Igoe once stood that I think really shows that preservation is a lot more about buildings, because the buildings are gone. There are a few buildings on the site, a school, health clinic, but the people of Pruitt-Igoe are still around. And so I think historic preservation is as much about identity and memory as it is about the built environment. So we looked at this site in ways in which the reuse of the site could honor the history. And we had an international competition. We had 346 submissions, 3 winners and 31 finalists.
And this is the first prize winner, was it not? That's the first prize
winner?
First
prize winner.
And what was her proposal?
The first prize winner is called St. Louis Ecological Production Line. It's more of sort of an urban agriculture land use plan. It isn't as specific as some of the other entries. There were entries ranging from very specific architectural interventions to sort of process-oriented ones. Some were focused on youth and youth political education. That was one of the third prize winner was that. Some focused on whimsical ideas. Some on rebuilding it as part of the urban grid once again. So a whole gamut of ways of thinking about that site. But again, I see it as a preservation project. Some of my colleagues might not. But it's
and I know you do tours as well of what formerly stood there.
Oh, I've done probably 50 or 60.
Plenty of tours. I want to move over to a topic about brick theft. St. Louis is known for its beautiful, beautiful brick buildings for homes as well as some of the buildings downtown. Talk about brick theft in St. Louis. How big of a problem is it?
It's a huge problem. And people are stealing buildings. If that doesn't ring alarm bells in the world of preservation, I don't know what will. The sad fact is it's been going on for 30, 40 years, as long as people have been vacating parts of the city and leaving property abandoned. So in some ways it's a symptom of the malady and not the cause. But the result is still very striking. Buildings being burned down, looted, the brick walls taken illegally in the middle of the night. And most of this is happening in very fragile north side neighborhoods, running from Old North all the way to the Ville, taking down building stock that we know will eventually find a market. So these are buildings that might be preserved.
So where do people go with, I mean, this is a Missionary Baptist Church. We have a couple more images of buildings that you have photographed that have suffered from brick theft. What are people doing with this? Where are they taking this?
Well, the thieves take these on trucks to brick yards where they sell them. They get paid in cash. And the city's tried to crack down these brick yards. They actually shut one down for a long period of time, but there's always somebody else who'll pop up and buy this stuff. And then the brick goes out of town. It goes to the Sun Belt, goes to Florida, goes to places where they're building lots of new houses and using this as face brick where it's very valuable. And it's an epidemic. I mean, we're not, even if you think the buildings aren't viable for reuse, we're losing this material and we're losing demolition jobs that could go to legitimate licensed contractors.
No, it's really interesting because I know several aldermen have picked up on this topic as well. I do want to move on to something that's a little bit more pleasant and that you're passionate about, which is mid-century architecture here in St. Louis. We have a bunch of photos of some things that you've been involved in and some things that you're not. But talk about the mid-century buildings that Jefferson Bank, which the 50th anniversary of the demonstration's coming up. But what's so interesting to you about mid-century architecture in St. Louis?
I mean, what's interesting is that a lot of people assume that when they think of St. Louis architecture, they think of Victorian architecture, but architecture did not stop in St. Louis with World War II. We actually built a lot of incredible buildings by very talented designers after World War II. We weren't building on the big scale we built at the turn of the century, but we have a lot of very small gems and a lot of major gems like the Planetarium, the Gateway Arch, Lambert Terminal, the Priory Chapel, et cetera, et cetera. What I like the most about mid-century modernism right now is it always takes a style sort of to come back to jumpstart a new generation of preservationists. So in the 1960s and 70s, preservationists were discovering all of those dowdy Second Empire Victorian houses in Lafayette Square that their fathers and mothers had discarded and thought were ugly and gaudy and out of fashion. The same thing happened with mid-century modernism. A lot of our parents grew up in the suburbs. They don't like it. But the next generation is starting to see this is cool. This is cool architecture. We want to save it. We want to live in ranch houses. We want to save the Starbucks and the Flying Saucer.
Yes, let's talk about the Starbucks. That's great Starbucks. I've been to it in Chipotle there.
Most interesting Starbucks in the world.
A lot of people, so this was Del Taco, and I mean, a long history of it. People really kind of got behind this. And I know you were very vocal about this and some others, and it ended up, tell me a bit about this. I mean, what's so unique about it, besides the fact that it looks like a flying saucer?
Well, yeah, it's a unique building. It's called the hyperbolic paraboloid. It's an interesting concrete form with a strange name. The architect, Dick Henry, who designed it, is still still around. He actually helped lead some of the protests.
Okay.
So you've got this beautiful story there. But what we have more than anything else is this is a building that's touched a lot of lives. Even if it's just driving by or walking by, and that weird looking building there by SLU, maybe it's late night tacos that led some people there. Again, that sort of personal connection. This is a landmark that defines our St. Louis now. This is not some landmark that is a relic of another time. It's a living building, and its history is now going to continue into our children and grandchildren's lives as well.
Exactly.
And so this amazing sort of grassroots preservation effort started not by an architectural historian or a specialist, really started with a Facebook page launched by someone I had never heard of, Mike Batchelor, just some guy out of nowhere, getting like 12,000 likes overnight. And then Mayor Slay jumps on the bandwagon, aldermen are jumping on the bandwagon, and then finally the developer himself, to his credit, jumps on the bandwagon, and we get this amazing grassroots victory that's really, it's really driven by emotion and this this love. It's a real positive story.
Before we wrap things up, there is this tower in North County. It's at Chambers and 367.
Another round building.
Please tell me. I threw this in here
People love
because
round buildings.
I see this building, and I've always wanted to know the history of it, and that's why I wanted to wrap it up with this and include this. Tell me about the top of the tower restaurant and the
part of
history
a
of this
development
building.
from 1967, so it's supposed to be a very elegant restaurant. People are moving out from the city in the 60s, so this is part of that sort of settling of North County. This is a really unusual building that was, sort of the height of automobile-driven suburban development and elegance, which by today's standards, is actually something more interesting than a lot of the sprawl that's being built now. I mean, we're seeing this sort of interest returning to the older parts of the suburban communities, just like people returned to the city 30 years ago. So this is cool again, and maybe there's a viable use, and that view is incredible. I mean, a lot of North County around there is still sort of rural, so you get a really great view of a lot of greenery. The Flying Saucer can be saved and revitalized. A building like top of the towers surely can too.
Yeah. Well, Michael, we're out of time, but it's just so interesting to talk to you, and there's so much more. I really encourage you at home to go to Preservation Research Office, to their website, and also if you're interested, they do tours around town. They do their nitty-gritty work that they're hired to do, but Michael does fascinating tours all around the St. Louis area, and just go to their website, contact them if you're interested in learning all about St. Louis's rich architectural history. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you at home for watching. Please keep it right here on STL TV.